One of the things that I keep on talking about is when Donald Trump was in Michigan and he was in a non-union shop. He pretended it was like a union shop. He gave non-union workers signs that said union workers for Trump. Then he told them that they're picketing for the wrong reasons. This clip just continues to stand out in my mind, but also Donald Trump continued to make representations about the auto industry in Michigan that just don't seem to match reality. Anyway, let me show you this clip first, and then I want to kind of bring in an expert here. Let's show you the clip.
In other words, your current negotiations don't mean as much as you think. I mean, I watch you out there with the pickets, but I don't think you're picketing for the right thing. But if they endorse me, your leadership, you can tell them I said it, although I have a feeling they may be watching tonight.
So I'm joined right now by Chad Livengood. Chad is the politics editor at the Detroit News and obviously writes a lot of pieces about the auto industry in Michigan. But one stood out to me recently where you talked about how Donald Trump keeps lamenting the big auto plants are being constructed in Mexico. And at the same time, Trump was saying that in Michigan, 6 miles from where he was standing, there was a gigantic auto plant being built at that exact moment. So, look, you're an expert in this area. Does Donald Trump's rhetoric on the auto industry meet the reality?
It does not. There are many times where he talks in broad terms that the auto industry in the U.S. is going to just go into complete collapse, and it just is not the reality. He is kind of actively out trashing the transition to electric vehicles, and then turns around and praises Tesla and calls those EVs beautiful. And so this was a really interesting moment where he's in essentially a bedroom community of Lansing, Michigan, that has 2 major General Motors plants. One is out in Delta Township, which was 6 miles away from where he's standing. And next door to it is where GM and a partner, South Korean battery maker LG Energy Solutions, are building a massive 2 million square foot battery plant for next generation EVs. And battery plants, are getting kind of dismissed and trashed a lot, particularly in the GOP. But they are the engine or powertrain plant. Vitally important to have those plants in your state if you want to have an assembly plant in your state, and all the other suppliers that come with it. And just down the road in Lansing, the city of Lansing Grand River Assembly is a plant that makes Cadillacs. It used to make the Camaro, and GM has already shut down production of the Camaro. And these Cadillac cars are probably going away next, and this plant is slated to become an EV plant. And so here you had Trump. He was trashing the infrastructure, the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. But that IRA, that law, is providing a $500 million grant to General Motors to convert that Lansing Grand River plant to an EV plant in the future. And as we know from the record, the person who cast the tie-breaking vote for the the Inflation Reduction Act was Vice President Harris.
There's also the issue of Donald Trump attacking foreign auto suppliers in Michigan, but then encouraging, when it suits him, foreign auto manufacturers in Michigan. And it's entirely inconsistent as well to say you're going to ban a supplier, but then potentially welcome a manufacturer. What do you make of that? And what I'm specifically referring to is, the rhetoric there of the Chinese supplier that actually is, you correct me if I'm wrong, you're an expert, creating jobs in the area that he says he wants shut down, but then wants to bring in manufacturing. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so this is a case where I think Trump gets kind of like tied up in his own trade rhetoric and doesn't follow the sort of pathway to what he's talking about. And so he's out talking on the campaign trail. I'm going to put 200% tariff on these Chinese EV car makers that are building plants and building cars in Mexico, and then going to try to export them into the U.S. Well, one, Joe Biden's already done that. He put 102% tariff on these Chinese EVs being assembled in Mexico to try to stop them from flooding the market. One of these Chinese EV makers is trying to flood the market with $12,000 EVs, which would greatly put both the Detroit 3 at disadvantage and also Tesla at disadvantage. Not to mention the traditional foreign Japanese and Korean automakers. Then Trump turns around and says, if they're going to build the Chinese are going to build an EV assembly plant in North America, they're going to build it in the U.S. and we want them in Michigan, we want them in other states. And then he turns around and he's actively opposing Goshen, a Chinese battery maker, from building a plant and employing more than 2,000 people in Big Rapids, Michigan. Last week, J.D. Vance campaigned and had a rally just down the road at a horse farm where there's an activist who lives there and has been opposing this plant on national security grounds. So I kind of raised the question, well, which is it? You're either for Chinese investment in manufacturing and the automobile industry in the U.S., or you're not. You can't be for the assembly plant and not for the parts plant, because again, you can't build these big battery packs without having an assembly plant nearby or somewhere in the U.S. to take them to. And this Goshen plant, Goshen is the U.S. subsidiary. Goshen is a third owned by Volkswagen. And Volkswagen has plants in the South, and presumably these batteries would be built in Michigan and shipped to the South for final assembly.
When Donald Trump goes into Michigan, goes to a non-union plant, pretends it's a union plant, like literally creates a scene like out of The Apprentice with people holding signs, to me, and when I hear, what President Sean Fain says, like that's highly offensive to make a mockery of workers and their livelihood. Do you think though the message is getting out in Michigan? One of the reasons I wanted to chat with you was at the national level. It's possible that someone in California doesn't know the specific dynamics of all of the intricacies of the auto industry in Michigan, both with your kind of American manufacturers, but also as you're discussing these foreign manufacturers that still employ a lot of people, the suppliers, and how that all impacts the economy. Donald Trump paints this doom and gloom scenario that you would think it was Governor Wall said that we were living in Mad Max, like that there was an apocalypse taking place in Michigan, and that's not what's happening. But when you say something over and over and over again, we've seen in history that sometimes that impacts people's ways of thinking, but like you're there on the ground. So how are people reacting to his rhetoric that isn't matching the reality? That's an objective fact. When someone tells you, hey, you're doing horrible. And it's like, nah, yeah, but I'm kind of doing better than when. How is that being perceived though? Yeah.
I mean, it's true that the automakers have pulled back a little bit on their EV strategy. They are losing money, but Tesla has spent a decade losing money. I mean, there are risks involved in business. Donald Trump should know that. He definitely knows that. He's the self-proclaimed king of debt. And so these companies are taking on, they're pursuing this because China's doing it. Like either we're going to compete with China or not. And the fear is if you do not get in the EV space, you do not try to build an affordable entry-level EV, China will come in and do it for us. And that's Sean Fain's point. That's also Mary Barra's point and Jim Farley's point. The CEOs of GM and Ford, they know that the BYD Automotives of the world is a monstrous Chinese automaker. They're coming for their lunch, and so that's why they're pursuing this strategy of trying to partner with Chinese firms. So Ford, for example, is partnering with a Chinese battery maker, CATL, to build a battery plant 35 miles away from where Donald Trump was standing last week. I mean, literally, Donald Trump could not have come to a more important corridor right now in Michigan than the I-69 corridor, where he was standing at this it's a metal supply plant. And we actually checked to make sure that this Alro Steel that he was at, they're not a supplier, at least known to be a supplier for these two major projects, which would have been a kind of a real sort of red flag. But nonetheless, there's a lot of downstream effect of the auto industry, and there has been multiple billions of dollars invested in plants in Michigan just in the last 5 years. Some of it dating back to Trump's term in office, and there is that these investments are not made lightly. They are 25, 30-year investments, which is why GM is making this building this $2 billion plant to build batteries down the road from where Trump was, and Ford is building its own $2 billion plant down the road because they are making a long-term play to be part of this. And all the rhetoric of that Trump says that Harris and Biden are trying to ban gas vehicles. There's no ban on gas vehicles. There's no EV mandate that people must buy EVs, but there is an effort by the Detroit Three to get in the game, which they have been way behind on. And they know there's a game because there's 1.2 million EVs being sold annually now in the U.S., and half of them are coming from Tesla plants in Texas and California, and then globally, GM is getting just destroyed right now in China. And guess who's making 1 million vehicles a year now in China? Elon Musk and Tesla. And that's another thing that I kind of keep noticing on when Trump talks about the auto industry, trashes the EV transition, makes those pronouncements that the Detroit Three are going to implode. But there's always a lot of favorable comments about a favored son, and that's Elon Musk.
Chad, finally, when I was watching Donald Trump speak at that factory, I couldn't help but notice the people who were behind him, who were from time to time, they looked a little confused by some of the things. They couldn't hide their face some of the times when he was making some of these statements, and you saw them, I just saw it in their eyes that they may be supporters of his, and I don't know, but when he's saying these things, it can't possibly match the reality of what their experience is in that factory, though. And I know that, as you said, that factory was not directly linked to some of these new suppliers, and you check that to see if there would be any red flags there. But nonetheless, that factory has to be aware of everything that you just outlined here about the lay of the land. So when he goes in there, in your reporting, I mean, are they okay just being used as a prop to basically trash their own future? Because the things that he's saying is actually antithetical to their business planning, right? I mean, and their bottom line. And so why do they let him do it? I mean, you must be speaking to some of these people. Like, what's the hook?
This is the one that always confounds me as kind of a reporter who covers business and politics, why business people kind of go along with these things. I mean, when we reached out to the CEO of that company, he said, well, Donald Trump asked to do a press conference here. Well, this was not a press conference. This was a campaign speech, mini rally. There's this is one of the things that you find on the ground, and we saw this in our polling this week, which our Detroit News WDIV poll shows Trump with just a narrow 1-point lead, well within the margin of error. But when you ask them, like, broadly, who's better at the economy, Trump or Harris, they say Trump. But then you start asking them, like, personality, traits, and who do you trust? Who's smarter? Who is who has your values at stake? And they say Harris, and so this is one of the things that is just one of the things we have to watch really closely is understanding what type of messages are people really reacting to. And any kind of rhetoric about China just gets people riled up in Michigan. And that's why they keep going back to it. That's why J.D. Vance is holding a rally in a farm field in rural Mecosta County, because they know this plays well to their base, even if it doesn't really sell well in, let's say, the suburbs, which this is where I watch closely. Oakland County, a county built of automotive wealth. And if you can't keep it within reach in Oakland County, you're not going to win, or Trump's not going to win. I mean, that's just the reality. And so how he threads this needle of trashing the EVs and claiming the entire auto industry is going to collapse, and then tries to go tell people in Oakland County everything's going to be fine with your future. Maybe this is the fear that he's looking for to try to capitalize on.
Well, Chad, I hope we can get you back. We went a little longer than I anticipated, but I was just very fascinated because we don't hear this from any of the kind of national news networks that can really, at the level of granularity, explain these issues. We hear the talking points. What I love about your reporting is that, you're on the ground, you're making the calls to all the people. And to me, that's what journalism's really about, and not just the talking points that we hear. Chad Livengood, politics editor at the Detroit News. Check out his work, support local journalism, support Detroit News, DetroitNews.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram @MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.